Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please subscribe to our channel and check out our other videos. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe that this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence our communities and world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit our website at oaktreechurch.com, where you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process we call The Path. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or through our website contact form. Now, please enjoy this message.
Morning, church. So normally when I'm up here, it's because he's not able to be here. So I think this week he just wanted to give you guys a break from all of the that we've been going through in the last couple of months. So I decided, I'll come up and teach for Father's Day. So like he said, we're going to be continuing along in Zechariah. And if you guys remember, right, last week when we were finishing up in Zechariah 9, we were seeing not only the historical context and how the Bible does relate to history, and we see a lot of this, but just how a lot of the things that God had said He will do, He had already done. He had protected Israel from Assyria. He had brought them back. He had protected them from Greece and all these other empires throughout history. And so today, when we continue on in chapter 10, we're starting that transition. We're seeing a little more. Here's some more promises God has made, and some of these haven't happened yet, but we know that they will happen because these other ones He made have already happened. So I'm just going to start and just read through the chapter, and I want to go back and show you some of the stuff that's really cool here. And I'm starting in verse 2, and Zechariah 10, verse 2, it says, "For the household gods have spoken wickedness, the soothsayers have seen a lie, and as for the dreamers, they have disclosed emptiness and give comfort in vain. Therefore the people set out like sheep and become scattered because they have no shepherd. I am enraged at the shepherds and will punish the lead goats. For the Lord who rules over all has brought blessing to his flock, the house of Judah, and will transform them into his majestic warhorse. From him will come the cornerstone, the wall peg, the battle bow, and every ruler. And they will be like warriors trampling the mud of the streets in battle. They will fight, for the Lord will be with them, and will defeat the enemy cavalry. I, says the Lord, will strengthen the people of Judah, and deliver the people of Joseph, and will bring them back because of my compassion for them. They will be as though I had never rejected them, for I am the Lord their God, and therefore I will hear them. The Ephraimites will be like warriors, and will rejoice as if they had drunk wine. Their children will see it and rejoice. They will celebrate in the things of the Lord. I will signal for them and gather them, for I have already redeemed them. Then they will become as numerous as they were before. Though I scatter them among the nations, they will remember in far-off places. They and their children will sprout forth and return. I will bring them back from Egypt, and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them to the land of Gilead and Lebanon, for there will not be enough room for them in their own land. The Lord will cross the sea of storms, and will calm its turbulence. The depths of the Nile will dry up, and the pride of Assyria will be humbled, and the domination of Egypt will be no more. Thus I will strengthen them by my power, and they will walk about in my name, says the Lord." So a little bit of background that we've been going through. We remember that as the Israelites, they're in their land, and they just got back from a 70-year exile. They have been in the land for a bit, but it's still recent in their memory. And it's not all of them. It's only a few of them, and they've run into quite a few issues here, and so they were asking for guidance. They were asking for, what should we do? And the Lord gave them guidance, and now He said, and along with this, here's what I'm going to do. I'm telling you now, this is what will happen. But He's also saying, here's what's coming. And so right in verse 2, after last week and saying that He will deal with all these problems, He's going to say, well, here's why these problems have occurred. They have household gods, they had idols, speaking wickedness, soothsayers seen a lie, dreamers, and false leaders. Now, these people are the people who have been trying to lead them and lead them away from God. They're the people who step up and go, well, listen to me because I had this vision. Listen to me, I had this dream, and I had this. And I can tell you, here's what we're supposed to do. The problem is, these people were not from God. They were on their own, and what they were trying to do was lead people away. And so, if you remember, He says, they have no shepherd. In the Bible, a shepherd is usually describes a leader, describes somebody who is leading the flock or the people. And so because Israel had no shepherd and had no leaders, they were falling under the sway of these people who were stepping up and going, I can lead, I can do this, follow me. And the Lord says that he is enraged at them and will punish these people. I like the translation here the net uses, lead goats. A lot of other Bibles, instead of saying lead goats, it says leaders or rulers or followers. But lead goats has a kind of fun connotation to it. As I was studying this, I didn't find the word lead goat is not really used in modern times as much anymore. Instead, we call them Judas goats, coming from Judas Iscariot, who led Jesus to his betrayal. And so the idea here is when shepherds raise sheep and when they raise goats, they have one goat who's been around longer than the others, who's kind of in charge, and all the other sheep blindly follow this one around. And the shepherd tells this sheep what to do, and he follows and he wanders around. That leads him to the pasture. And eventually, when it comes time for the sheep to go to the slaughterhouse, the lead goat runs right up to the slaughterhouse and then stops at the door and turns aside. And all the other sheep blindly follow, and they walk right into the slaughterhouse because this is where the lead goat was heading. This is where we need to go. And so the idea here is the lead goat is the one who's running around doing all these things, and he goes right up until the point of punishment and steps aside and lets everyone else walk blindly into the punishment. And so the Lord is enraged at these people because these people who were leading the Israelites were leading Israelites right up to punishment and stepping aside and letting everyone else get in trouble for doing all these things while stopping right at the edge. And that's what these lead goats are. And so they're the ones leading Israel to the destruction. They're the ones who led Israel, and then Israel followed them and worshiped these false idols, followed these soothsayers, these dreamers. And this is what led right into their exile and why they had to go away from the land for so long. And he says in verses 3, he says he's brought blessings back to his flock. When they left the land, when the Lord made a promise to them, he said he was going to be with them, he was going to do all sorts of things, and they had to follow him. And when they stopped following him, he started taking away their blessings, remember? And eventually, he took them out of the land. They're back in the land, and now he's saying, not only have I brought you back to the land, I'm bringing back all those blessings that I had promised you. The house of Judah, which is most of the southern tribes and most of what's left of the Israelites in this land. And he's going to transform them from a flock to a warhorse. So, when we think of flocks of sheep, we rightfully think of like dumb, blindly following, and that's kind of what described Israel. They were blindly following these people, they were blindly wandering around, and they had no leaders, they had no people, and they were like this flock of sheep. And God said, I'm going to take this flock of people who can't defend for themselves, can't follow, and I'm going to turn them into a warhorse. So, what do we know from history about warhorses? They're the ones that lead the charge. They're the mighty figures. If you've ever stood next to a real horse, not just one of those like ponies or anything, but like a real war horse or a real mounted horse, they're huge, they're big, they're tough. They are intimidating to look at. They are strong, useful to their allies, feared by their enemies. And especially at this time period, that was true. The people with the war horses were the ones who won most times in history. And so he's saying, I'm going to take Israel, this little nation who just got beat up by enemy after enemy, exiled, killed, captured, and who's just returned, a small remnant of people, and I'm going to make them into a mighty warhorse, my warhorse that will lead into battle. And then we see this again in verse 5 when he says, they will fight, they will no longer be like sheep who hide. When they fight, they will win. But in verse 5, he says they will defeat enemy cavalry. So now he's taking that and reversing it. So what do we know what I just said? Like cavalry, they're the ones that are feared. They're the strongest. They will take out infantry. They will win. And yet God says, I'm going to take Israel, this nation to the rest of the world, nobodies who everyone can just come through and take, and I'm going to make them feared. I'm going to make them strong. I'm going to make it to where when they fight, they win. They take out enemies, even enemies who should be able to beat them. But going back up a little bit, in verse 4, he says, and he's talking about the house of Judah, from him will come the cornerstone, the wall peg, the battle bow, and every ruler. And what does he mean by that? A lot of this is, like I said earlier, starting to look forward in time. And at this time, it was looking forward to Jesus. So when we think of cornerstone, what's the most obvious reference of a cornerstone? Jesus Christ, who is our chief cornerstone. And so from him will come the cornerstone. From the house of Judah, from that line, will come the cornerstone that will build up the kingdom. From him will come the wall peg, the ruler. Jesus is going to be the one who will be their ruler, who will be their cornerstone, who will build this mighty people, who will build this new Israel where they have all the strength and all the things that God has promised. So what about the wall peg? There's actually a couple of things this could mean here. And then one thing that I found while I was studying it that's not necessarily what it means, but a cool comparison. So wall pegs were traditionally used in ancient times as this thing, as kind of like what we have today with the hooks and everything, but a little more. It was secured firmly into the ground. It was secured firmly into the wall. And it's where you hung the most important tools, your most important weapon, whatever you needed, so that when you were ready for the day or when something came, you had it right there, ready to use. Some translations also use the word tent peg, which is also kind of neat because a tent peg holds their tent up. When your tent peg is secure, the tent stays up no matter what happens to it. But if you use a weak tent peg or an unsecured one, the tent will fall apart by the easiest and lightest wind. And so no matter which one you favor, seeing the peg here is the idea of he will build this firm foundation, and no matter what happens, it will be readily available, it will give them what they need, or it will hold what they need and hold them firm, because it'll be a firm foundation, not a weak peg. The battle bow, you don't really see the battle bow reference as much in the Bible, but we do see a lot of references to the sword and the mighty sword and God being the sword. And so the battle bow here is the same idea. They could have just said, and from him will come the bow. He specifically says battle bow. So when we think of bows, we think of archery today, this little hunting bow, this little thing. A battle bow was this massive bow, almost as big as a person. And most common reference would probably be the English with their giant longbows. And these bows were used to win. They were the strongest. They were feared by their enemies just like cavalry. It was an unstoppable weapon that would reign and win and bring victory to the side that used it. And so we're seeing a lot of references here. Not only will he bring this cornerstone, not only will he bring this ruler, but this is going to be a ruler who rules by force, a ruler who rules with weapons and might, not one who's passive. And so we know when Jesus came the first time, he came not as a conqueror, as a ruler, but as the leader. When we see this, looking forward to this, and when God sends his ruler back to rule, he's going to rule through might and through force, and he's going to make Israel a might and a forceful nation. On that note, when he says every ruler, the traditional Hebrew, and I had to look this one up, I haven't studied Hebrew, so I had to use a couple of different commentaries and a couple of Hebrew things to show it. And what I learned was the word they use here in Hebrew for ruler is not the traditional word used throughout the Old Testament for ruler. This word would actually have almost the translation of a dictator or a forceful ruler. And so when Jesus comes back, when he is over Israel this time, it kind of compares to what we see in Revelation. It says that the rod of iron in Revelation, it says the ruler or the mighty leader. When he comes back, he's not going to be that, well, I hope you guys follow me. I hope you guys have the choice. This is going to be a nation that is under him, that he leads by force, and that he is the powerful ruler that no one will overthrow. So what I was saying earlier about them being strong again in verse 5, they were strong like this one time before in their history. And this was during the time of Joshua. And of course, when we think of Joshua, we think of marching around the city, Jericho, and all the other things. But there was actually a lot more than just that one fight in his time. During the time of Joshua, they had just come out of Egypt, and they were at their strongest. They marched into the land, and they beat all their enemies when they obeyed the Lord. There's a small forgotten story about the time they sent off these warriors to this little town that was nobody, and they got beaten. And they come to find out they got beaten because somebody in their camp had disobeyed the Lord. And so we see here, they will fight, for the Lord will be with them, and they will defeat. And so, just like before, it's not because he will make them all mighty, he will make them all the greatest warriors in the land. They are only winning because God is with them. And this is what shows God is with them, is because this little nation of nobodies is suddenly beating every single person who's tried for so long to destroy them. And so this is God saying, yes, I will be with you again like I was before. I will bring all these things back. I will make you mighty, but you will only be mighty because you are with me. And it brings back to that covenant he made with them. I will be your God, and you will be my people. It's a two-way relationship there. When they're with him, he's with them. So he says in verse 6, he will strengthen the king of Judah, deliver the people of Joseph, and will bring them back because of his compassion for them. So why does he specify kingdom of Judah, people of Joseph? Two reasons. First of all, because if we remember right when we've gone back a little bit, Israel had split into two nations after they stopped following God. One was the two southern tribes, which were traditionally known as the people of Judah, and one was the north 10 tribes, which was usually the people of Ephraim, who was Joseph's son, so the people of Joseph. The other reason I'll come back to in a minute, but it's kind of cool because traditionally when we hear it, it's the people of Israel. And so him saying the people of Joseph is meant to bring up that reminder, one, of the split, but two, of the imagery he's trying to show in a second. But the reason he says he's going to bring them back, he has compassion for them. This is saying something, because every time we study the Old Testament, every time we do this, what do we see? We see Israel again and again and again going, ooh, I know God's good over here, but this idol seems to be a little more important over here. Or, ooh, I know we're supposed to follow God and I'm not supposed to do this, but this looks really fun. I'm going to go do this instead. And so they repeatedly go against God, despite having seen his powers, despite having seen firsthand what he can do. And yet time and time again, he has compassion on them. He brings them back, he restores them. And again here he says, I'm going to bring them back and restore them because I have compassion on them. It's not something they earned, it's something that he's doing for them. And this time will be different than every other time before. Every time he's brought them back to the land, every time he's done this, it's a few people coming back. Even this time, when he brought them back from their exile, it's not the whole nation. It was a remnant, a small group of people. And even today, there are more Jews in the entire world than there are in Israel. There's actually a smaller portion in Israel. And so even today, we see it's kind of like a remnant in Israel, and the rest of the Jews are all over the place. Not this time. This time, the Lord says, it will be as though I had never rejected them, and I will hear them, and I will bring them back. And later on, he says, and they will be more numerous than they have been ever before. So, what does he mean in verse 7? They will be like warriors, rejoice that they had drunk wine, see it and rejoice. Well, since their exile, since the last time Israel was at peace was under the reign of Solomon, and that was a very, very long time ago. Since that time, Israel has been under constant attack. Israel has been under constant threat. They have not had peace. They have not had the ability to have their children go outside and see and rejoice. Remember, it was a couple weeks ago he was talking about, and even last week he said he brought it up again. Israel today, even, the children can't just go outside and play in the streets. There's a constant threat in the sky. They can't go outside and have parades. Even when they do have their memorials and their national holidays, they have how many people on guard day and night, how many people watching. It's not I can go out and rejoice and have fun, and drinking wine is their traditional relaxing thing where they can just be off guard. Israel is constantly on guard. But at this point, when he brings them back, when he's with them again, they can rejoice, they can have fun, they can be off guard because they're celebrating in God, and they're celebrating in God because he's the one who allows them this. He's going to allow them this time of peace, this time of celebration, where they have no worry about what's going on around them because they will be safe and secure in him. So here's where I was talking about the imagery. Starting in verse 8, he says, I will signal for them and gather them, for I have already redeemed them. Then they will become as numerous as they were before. So he's going to signal them. He's going to call them. He's going to redeem them. Now, of course, when we think of redeem, the first thing we think of is Christ dying for us, redeeming us from our sins and everything. And yes, that is a cool comparison here, but it is not actually what they're talking about. Here, he's talking to his people, the Israelites. And so when he says redeem, he's saying, I'm redeeming them from the sins they committed. I'm redeeming them as a nation back from everything they've done, and I will hold my promise to them and bring them back to the rightful status they were with me before they turned against me. But even though it's not talking about Jesus, and even though it's not talking about that redemption, it is a cool comparison. If he's willing to redeem them, even though they constantly sin against him, even though they constantly turn, and they made a promise that they were never going to turn and they were never going to do all these things, so they constantly do, even like the day after they made the promise they weren't going to do it, how much more is he willing to redeem us when he sends his own son to redeem us, when he sends his own son to save us? When we never made that promise, we never did say, yeah, we can hold to that, we can stay sinless. And so if he's going to redeem them, and he's going to keep his promise to them, of course he's going to keep his promise to us. And I think that's a really cool and comforting thought, that even though this redemption isn't the one he's talking about toward us, we can still see the parallels. We can still see that, yes, if the Lord holds his promises here and the Lord holds his promises then, he's going to keep true his promises to us. And he did promise to redeem us despite our sins and our failures. And he never expects us to earn this redemption. He never expects us to earn this. He just expects us to come to him and say, yes, I know I messed up. I want to be back in your good graces. And he says, yeah, I'll do that. You guys want to come back? You're welcome back. And it's the same with Israel. They didn't earn this. They definitely did not earn this redemption. They definitely did not earn this coming back to the land. They called out to God and asked for help, and we saw last week, when they call out and ask for rain, he'll give them rain. When they call out and ask for this, he will give it to them. All they have to do is ask, and he will give it to them. All we have to do is ask, and he will redeem us. And so, again, he will make them as numerous as they were before. We don't know exact counts. There's a couple places in the Bible where we have counts of the nation of Israel and their descendants, but we don't have exact counts of how numerous they were before. But after years of war, after years of struggle, after years of just fighting to survive, even today, in the land of Israel, they are not as numerous as they were before. There's not as many Jews around in their land they were promised as there could be. And yet at this time, he says they'll come as numerous as they were before, and maybe even more, because there will be more descendants then than there are now. He says, though I scatter them among the nations, they will remember in far-off places, they and their children will sprout forth and return. So this one probably hit them home a lot harder than the rest of this passage. The Lord's saying, I'm the one who's going to scatter you. I'm the one who did scatter you. And there was a couple different times when he scattered them before. They just got back from being scattered. They just got back from being kicked out of their own land and spread among the nations where they were being sold as slaves, they were being prisoners, they were being this. They spent 70 years out of their own land in exile in these different places. And the God's like, yeah, I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who scattered you. But if you remember right, I told you I was going to do that when you guys didn't listen to me. And you guys didn't listen to me. But it's kind of, not only is it the reprimand here, this one is more of a comforting. For though he's the one who scattered them, he's the one who's going to call them. And they're not only is he going to call them, but all the descendants will actually listen to his call, and they will come back home. And not just them, but their children, all of their descendants. And so God says, although I'm the one who sent you away, although I'm the one who scatters you, I'm the one who's going to bring you back, and I'm going to make sure that all of you are brought back. Another cool reference here is another time we see him scattered is in the New Testament. And again, this is not what this is doing, but as I was studying this, I just saw so many comparisons between how he treats Israel and how he treats us Christians. God scattered them at the beginning of Christianity after Jesus had left and the disciples were sitting around wondering what to do. A couple things happened, destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of this, and all the early Christians were scattered. And this was so that he could spread it to everyone. He's going to call everyone home eventually. And just like if he's going to do this for them, he's going to do it for us. And it's very cool how many comparisons we can see where God's like, yes, I'm doing this, and yes, I'm doing this. I have a reason for it, and it's not to spite you. It's not just to do harm to you. It's for your good in the end. It's so that you will all eventually come back home to me. In verse 10, he says, I will bring them back from Egypt and gather them from Assyria. He actually did these already. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen again. He's not going to scatter them. But where do we see this? And this is where that previous comparison I was talking about. Well, when did he bring them back from Egypt? Remember, he said people of Joseph? The youth group just talked about Joseph recently. And what happened with Joseph? He went into the land. He brought his family. And they stayed in Egypt. And eventually, they became slaves. Until God said, okay, it's time for me to bring you guys back from the land of Egypt into the land I promised you. And then what did we just talk about with Assyria? After years of peace and years of this, they started turning against God. And God said, okay, time to scatter you again. But they came back to him. He said, okay, it's time to bring you guys back to the land. And so it's this imagery here and this whole thing, this whole passage is meant to remind them, I can scatter you anytime I want. But I'm never going to leave you there. I'm always going to bring you back. And again, when I was studying this, I saw another New Testament comparison. It's the same idea of when they're shot across the world, but this time it's when he scattered the original disciples and they all left when he died. When he came back, he brought them all back together to give them a little more before he left and sent them on their mission. And so he's saying, yeah, I'm going to send you here. I'm going to send you out here. But I will always bring you back. I will always do that. And his promise to Israel is, yes, I will scatter you. Yes, I send you here. Yes, I send you there. But I'll bring you back. And he also says that he will gather them not only to their land, but the lands of Gilead and Lebanon. Now, I didn't get a map for this. I'm kind of wishing I would, but when we study history, when we study the Bible, the land that God promised to them is not the land they have today. The land they have today is this tiny little strip compared to everything that he's promised them. And yet right here he says, I'm not only going to bring you home, I'm going to bring you and spread you in these lands because there's going to be too many of you for your own land. So when I was saying, when he says not only will you be as numerous as before, I think there's going to be a lot more of them. And that's something we definitely don't see today. Because not only will they have their whole land back and everything that's promised, they will have these lands too. And God says, I'm giving you all this because I'm gathering all of your descendants back. And you're not going to have enough room in your own land because there will be so many of you. And that is something that we have definitely not seen since Solomon's time. And so we know this is something that they have to look forward to. And I'm sure this was a comforting thought to them as they're sitting around in their home, looking around and seeing only a small remnant of very few of their people, wondering what's next, what's the next step. And God says, don't worry, I have a plan, and this plan is to bring all of you back to where you will be my people again, and it will be all of you here in the land that I gave you. And so that was the encouragement, and that's why he's encouraging them to look forward to this. In verse 11, he talks about crossing the sea of storms, calming its turbulence, the depths of the Nile will dry, the pride of Assyria will be humbled, the domination of Egypt will be no more. A lot of these are reminiscence of miracles that they had already seen, that we look back in Genesis and Exodus and in the early Israelite society. Drying the sea, what does that sound like? When God led his people out of Egypt, what did they have to do? Cross the Red Sea. But they didn't cross the sea. They walked along dry land at the bottom of the sea. God says, well, I did it once, I can do it again, and this will be a sign that this is the time that you will see these miracles. The pride of Assyria will be humbled. We talked about last week, Assyria was this big nation that Israel had no chance. They were just bullying Israel every time they did. And you know what? A little bit later, Alexander came through and went, oh, look at that cute little nation of Assyria. I'm going to take them down. And so this big mighty nation was humbled and brought down. Egypt is a constant thorn in Israel's side. They're always causing problems. They've always been there. God says, you know what? I'm going to take their domination and it will be no more. So not only will he humble Egypt, he's going to make it to where they no more have this power to threaten them. And this is why he's saying this. He's saying, when I really decide I'm going to bring you all back to the land, when I really come this, you guys are going to know, because it's not just going to be a few of you come home at a time. When the Lord is ready to make his plans, there will be miracles accompanying Israel, miracles accompanying this that we really haven't seen since the time of Joseph, the time of Moses. And it will be really cool when the Lord does that. And then in verse 12, he says, "Thus I will strengthen them by my power, and they will walk about in my name." Again, this entire passage is a hopeful thing for Israel. This isn't a, well, you guys screwed up. This isn't a reprimand. This is a passage for them to be looking forward to. And I know this is God saying, I know you guys have been disheartened. I know you guys have lost a lot of your faith and a lot of your power. But take heart, take courage, take strength. This is what you guys have to look forward to. You will be strong again. He will strengthen them. And again, here's a little reminder. They will be strengthened by my name. God says, yes, I'm going to bring you guys back. I'm going to bring you back to this former glory, you guys. I'm going to give you guys all this power and stuff you haven't seen. But remember, it's not because of you guys. It's because of me. It's because of my power. And that's another thing I can say today. When we see all the stuff that we have to do, it's not because of us. It's because of God through us. And so his constant reminder throughout this entire passage is, yes, I'm doing this. Yes, I'm doing this. Yes, I'm doing this. But it's because of me. It's because you are with me. To Israel, it's because you are my people. I am doing this for you so that you and everyone else around you will remember it's my name. And then it says they will walk about in his name. Now, he's not talking about they're going to take an evening stroll and walk around for a little bit, and it'll be, in God's name, I'm taking this little walk. The whole connotation of Zechariah, when they say walking about, is the idea of, it's almost like strutting. It's the idea of they're walking about, everyone can see them, everyone can see who they are. But what is everyone seeing? They're not seeing this person. They're seeing the Lord's person. They're seeing the people of God are walking across the earth. Talked about last week, when a Jew walks around now, 10 people grab him, but they grab him to beat him up and take him down. In this time period, when a Jew walks about, 10 people are going to grab him and say, I know you're the person of God. I know you are God's people. Take me to God. Take me to him. Let me see him through you. And so when he says they're going to walk about in his name, it's the idea of, first of all, they're going to be able to walk about unafraid of what's going to happen to them, which that's something we can't really imagine today, seeing how Israel's treated. But not only are they going to walk around free of worry, they're going to walk around and everyone's going to see who God is, because when they walk around, they're going to show that they are God's people. And God's going to show himself to the rest of the world through the Jews like he always intended them to be. They were always supposed to be the priests of the world. God had always called them to be the people that would show the rest of the world who God is. And God says, at this time, I will finally make you what you were intended to be. My people, my representation to the rest of the world, so that the entire world can see me through you. So as I was studying this, it's always fun. The Old Testament has so many cool things, but it's very hard. We have to remember that these were promises to Israel. These were promises to the nation. So unless we are Jews, we can't always say, oh, God's going to strengthen all of us as Christians and make us mighty warriors. He's going to do this and that. But that doesn't mean there isn't anything that can apply to us today. And so as I was studying this, I saw two things that really hit me as, wow, I should take this away, and this is what I think we should walk away with. The first application is, who are we following? At the beginning, when God's talking about shepherds and lead-goats and things, that does apply to us today. Who are we following? Do we have a shepherd? And yes, we do. We have the true shepherd, Jesus Christ. They had to rely on God. They had to rely on their kings and everything, and they had to rely on God as this person they had to come to through the priests. We don't have that. We have a direct connection to Jesus Christ. And so the question is, are we following him? Are we letting him be the true shepherd in our lives? Or are we being like Israel and going, well, I know I'm supposed to follow God, but this person over here looks really cool. He's got a lot of money. I'm going to follow him. Or I know I'm supposed to be following God, but it looks like what he's doing over here is a lot more fun. The second part of that is, how are we being as individuals towards others? Are we being somebody who, like the Israelites, when we walk around, people can see God? Or are we being lead goats and false teachers that when we walk around and people see us, if they follow us, we're going to lead them down the wrong path? And so I'll challenge you guys when you're thinking of that. Are we being good followers and good leaders? Or are we going to be bad followers and bad leaders? The other thing I noticed when I was studying this, and I kind of said this already, is what are we looking forward to? Yes, a lot of these promises are to Israel, not to us, but God did make us quite a few promises in the New Testament too, didn't he? Now, our promises aren't a physical land and this physical blessing and physical strength, but he gave us so many spiritual promises and so many blessings to look forward to in eternity. And if he's going to keep these, we know he's going to keep those promises to us. And so my challenge is, how do we look onto that? Are we holding on to those promises and looking forward to the time when God gives us everything he promised us? Or are we saying, I know he promised this, and I know I have this to look forward to, but I'm not sure if I can trust him with this thing. I'm not sure if I can trust him with this part of my life. And so this week, I want you guys, as you go about your week, just think, God has always kept his promises. And so everything he's written in the future isn't really future. It's more like history written in advance. We know it's going to happen. And so the only thing we have to do is say, I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to respond to what God has already said is coming?